So around 4:30 p.m. on November 25th of 2020, a woman would call 911 to report her neighbor's house was on fire. The fire department would arrive at the modest ranch-style home where they encountered heavy smoke. They managed to get the fire under control, and after combing through the wreckage, they would come across the body of 27-year-old Mellissa Lamesch, who was lying face down on her kitchen floor, in which she was also 9 months pregnant. Now, at first, authorities had thought that she may have succumbed to a pregnancy complication or smoke inhalation after experiencing a medical emergency. But the case had become sinister once the coroner had found out that she had died from strangulation. So let's dive into today's story as we try to figure out why would somebody do this to her. And like always, viewer discretion is advised.
And here we go.
In 2013, Mellissa Lamesch had attended college where she met Matthew Plote. Now, both her and Matthew became friends, in which they ended up maintaining a casual relationship. And if you don't know what casual means, they were FWBs. They maintained this relationship for years until Mellissa had found out that she was pregnant. And when she found out, that's when the relationship had cooled off. When Matthew was told about the pregnancy, he didn't have the same interest that she had. He even tried to convince her to get rid of it. But Mellissa, she didn't want to go down that route. So then Matthew would go ahead and belittle her and then ghost her. Now this upset Mellissa because they were friends for so long, but she held out for the fact that she wanted Matthew to become more involved. But her parents told her not to push the matter and that they would help her out with whatever she needs. So she had the full support of her family. Now Mellissa, she was one of the people that liked to reinvent herself, whether through hairstyles or career, in which she had recently started working as an EMT because she fell into that line of work because she wanted to help people. Now Mellissa, she was excited about becoming a mom, even though her and Matthew had very little contact with each other. To make things easier for her, her father had convinced her to move into her childhood home. Now Mellissa would send Matthew sonograms and appointment dates just in case he decided he wanted to show up. But Matthew would respond very little each time she did so. Now Mellissa, she wanted her baby to have the option of having a mother and a father, even though Matthew wanted very little to do with it, which he would often shut down. Now here's the thing with Matthew, he wasn't just shutting out Mellissa, he was keeping the whole pregnancy a secret. Now Matthew, he was a firefighter, and like all firefighters, that you just don't work together, you also live together. And all of them talk about everything from personal issues to family matters. But when it came to Matthew, they knew nothing about him about to have a child. It wasn't just his coworkers that didn't know about it, his own parents didn't know that he was about to have a child. His parents had no idea until Mellissa told them, which infuriated Matthew, in which he would ask her why would she tell his parents, and in which she would say that she wanted them to have the opportunity to become grandparents. Now everything changed on Thanksgiving Eve of November 25th of 2020. Now at that time period, Mellissa was on the phone with her sister Casey. And while she was on the phone talking to her sister, she heard a knock on the door, and when she looked out the window, she noticed that Matthew was standing on her front porch. Now Mellissa thought that was curious because Matthew never came around until that day. So Mellissa would tell her sister that she'll call her back in a few after she figured out what Matthew was there for. And her sister would say, okay, just call him back when you get a chance. And after a while, she never heard back from her ever again. Now later that day, Casey would get a phone call when she thought it was Mellissa, but instead, she ended up getting the most devastating phone call she could never get. It was later that day when they had found out that Mellissa had passed away in a house fire. Now, during the investigation, the fire marshal would search around the house to try to find the point of origin of the fire, in which they had found that it started in the cabinet above the stove. But they figured it was a cooking accident until they noticed that all the burners was in the off position, in which they thought that was odd, in which they decided that maybe it might have been an electrical fire. But after checking all the wires, they realized that none of them were damaged or frayed to even start a fire. The fire marshal would come to the conclusion that the fire is what they call a survivable fire, which means that based on how the fire was started, the person was able to get out the house. Now, while the fire marshal were doing their investigation, police would go ahead and question the family, in which that's when they learned about the phone call between Mellissa and her sister, which was ended by Matthew showing up at the house. And that's when they found out that Matthew was a firefighter. Now, detectives would go ahead and talk to Matthew, in which they asked him why he was at the house, in which he stated the reason why he was there because he wanted to talk to Mellissa about money as well as her hospital appointments, because it would come to find out that Mellissa was due to be induced in 2 days. At this point, Matthew wasn't considered a suspect, so he was able to leave. Now, he wasn't considered a suspect until Melissa's autopsy came back, along with her lab work. Based on her lab work, they had found that she had normal levels of carbon monoxide in her system, as well as there was no soot in her lungs, which means she was not alive when the fire started. Now, during the autopsy, they had found evidence of strangulation due to hemorrhage around the neck. On December 14th of 2020, the Lamesch family will hold a funeral for both Mellissa and her unborn child, in which Mellissa was going to name her child Barrett. Now, Melissa's family believed that Matthew had something to do with her murder, all because of the fact that he didn't want to be a father and that he kept everything a secret. Now, police would contact Matthew's fire chief, in which he was surprised at the fact that he didn't know that Matthew was going to be a father. He was also surprised at the fact that Matthew was a suspect in the murder investigation. Police would ask the fire chief, did Matthew report to work any time that day? While going through his records, they have found out that Matthew had actually called in sick that day. So police would go ahead and ask Matthew to come back into the police station for more questioning. in which his question lasted over 7 hours. Police even state that during their questioning, Matthew would sit there emotionless as well as willing to communicate. Now, during the interview, Matthew would even state that he had no intentions of hurting Mellissa. Now, even though he said it, they couldn't take that as a admission of guilt, in which I call BS, because if it was anybody else, they would actually took that as an admission of guilt. So then police would try a different tactic in which they would ask his fire chief to have a conversation with him while wearing a wire. Now, at first, the police chief was against it, but after doing some thinking, he felt that he had to do this just so the family could have some answers. But during their conversation, they managed to get nothing out of him.
Initially, I had said no way, and I did some thinking about it and called him back and said yes.
You have a lot of responsibilities as a fire chief, but I can't imagine you ever thought wearing a wiretap would be one of them.
No, I don't freely talk about it. It's not something that I'm proud of. It was something that needed to be done in the hopes of helping the investigation. There's a grieving family out there that's looking for answers.
Now, a few months later, the fire marshal report would come out, in which it concludes that the fire was started with an incendiary, which meant that the fire was started intentionally. The police was also waiting for the DNA results to come back. Due to the fact that Melissa's body was not burnt up in the fire, they managed to find DNA underneath her fingernails, in which the results had came back as a match for Matthew. Now, some of you may be wondering, why would Matthew do this to Mellissa, who was excited about becoming a mother? And the behavior that Matthew had exhibited is what's called elimination of an unwanted child. Now, I talked about this in the previous video I've done before, in which the elimination of unwanted child is when a parent no longer wants to care for a child, in which they do everything they can to eliminate the problem. So on March 9th of 2022, over a year and a half after the fire, Matthew would be arrested and charged with first-degree murder, the intentional homicide of an unborn child, and arson. Matthew would then plead not guilty, in which he would take his case to trial. During the trial, the prosecutor would bring in experts in which they would try to show their findings, in which the defense would try to dispute their claim. Now, Matthew's defense team would state that Matthew is a firefighter. He saves lives. He doesn't take lives. But somehow they could not dispute the fact that Matthew did not want to have a child. Now, the trial would last over a week, in which the jury would deliberate for over 2 hours, in which they would come back with a guilty verdict. He was found guilty on all charges. On June 27th of 2024, Matthew was sentenced to life in prison without parole. So I have a question which I know would probably start an argument, but I still want to know that. Do you feel that if you're having a child with a person who doesn't want a child, do you feel that it's appropriate to try to have them more involved? Or do you feel that you should let them be because you may not know what they may be capable of? Go ahead and leave your comments, but try to keep it civilized. And if you like more forensic analysis of cases like this, go ahead and stay tuned for more videos to come. As well, if you're new, go ahead and check out my other videos as well too. And with that, have a great day.